So just some reflections on this weekend when our lives have been turned upside down, even if the devastation has not been as dramatic as we might have been expecting. Our context is always very important when we're reading scripture. So, for example, had we been using all of the readings, including the passage from Deuteronomy, and had I been with my friends at St. Luke's Church in Haifa, in northern Israel, we would have been reflecting on what it means to take hold of the idea that God is represented in Deuteronomy as having taken the land of the indigenous Canaanites and decided to offer it to the tribes of Israel. For the Palestinians of that land, for the Palestinian citizens of that modern country of Israel, there's a context that has to be taken into account when we engage with Scripture. On Thursday evening, we were gathered online, as always, to have a look at these readings a few days beforehand, and we were being led in our reflections by Empole Masamola, who, as we all know, is the incoming priest for our two churches, St. Thomas's and St. Paul's. Empole was speaking with us from Johannesburg in South Africa. And again, the theme of land being taken and claimed as a gift from God by one group of people at the expense of another group of people. In other words, colonialism and all that legacy of the 17th and 18th and 19th century would also be a major perspective to be listening to if we were gathering with friends in South Africa, and particularly black friends in South Africa, but not only black South Africans. In a sense, everyone is a victim of colonialism, including those of us who have benefited in so many ways. And if we were doing a workshop on the recent political history of Australia, just in the last couple of hundred years, since the European or the British invasion, then we would be wrestling with how the scriptures represent the displacement of the indigenous peoples by another group of people arriving, claiming to have the blessing of God with them, and that the future belongs to them, as does the land of the people who they are displacing. But that context has been pushed aside by the cyclonic winds of Tropical Cyclone Alfred, which has now been downgraded into a tropical low rain system, still with plenty of wind, as we saw overnight in parts of southeast Queensland, still with lots of rain, as we're probably going to experience in the next couple of days. So we find ourselves bumped out of our normal schedule. We haven't been going to the shops, the roads have been empty, public transport has been closed, and we're being told to hunker down and stay safe. Everything that we normally take for granted has been turned upside down, and we find ourselves in that land where the wild things are. We're so used to being able to do anything we want, anytime we choose, and the dynamics of nature, including weather, rarely have any impact on our plans. We're used to getting seasonal fruit out of season because we can do that. We have a privileged lifestyle in our culture, in our society. But for the last couple of days, and probably for the next couple of days, life is on hold. Our lives are not under our control. Not that they ever are, but we often pretend and think to ourselves that we're the ones making the decisions. So we find ourselves being pushed into this liminal space where we simply have to wait and watch and see what happens. And it is a testing time And that, of course, is the other way to translate the Greek word pyrasmos, which is temptation. Jesus is not so much being tempted by the devil as tested by the devil in the story we have in today's Gospel reading from Luke. It's a time of testing. And like any spiritual hero, or like any hero in the spiritual traditions of the great religions of the world, including the Old Testament and the New Testament, the hero Jesus has to face and overcome a series of tests. And the ones that are enumerated in Matthew and Luke are simply 3 examples of the kind of tests which Jesus faced constantly and which perhaps we face as well. And in many ways, the test is not so much to do something wrong as to select something which is okay, but is not the best. It's not what God would want for us, when the good is the enemy of the perfect, if you like. So Jesus finds himself sidetracked, and it's seen as being done by the Spirit. The Spirit takes Jesus out into the wilderness. Wilderness is not desert so much as simply the badlands, the barren area where life is more marginal and is more difficult to survive. And he's there, in biblical terms, for 40 days and 40 nights. Like the rain in Noah's flood and various other things. When something goes for 40 days and 40 nights, the Bible is telling us, listen to this story. There's something big going on here. And for us, it won't be 40 days and 40 nights, although it may seem like it at times. But it's still a time of testing, a time when we adjust our perspective on ourselves and our place within the systems of the world, including climate and weather. It's a time when we renew our sense of trust. What are the things we rely on? Where is our confidence located? Where are our lives anchored? And it's a time when we reflect on community. The communities that we're suddenly isolated from, the communities of people who might be coming to help us if we're isolated or in need of rescue, and the communities of people who are watching the weather radars, who are there on standby to restore the electrical power, who are going out on emergency missions to rescue people who have been trapped, even if those who are trapped because they've done the wrong thing. Nonetheless, the community responds with compassion, and that's another part of us reflecting on the significance of this time. So, over the next couple of days, as life proceeds more slowly, I invite you to take the opportunity to reflect on what's happening in your life, to reflect on God's call on you, to reflect on the people around you who are part of your faithfulness and your response to God's call, and to reflect on the significance of Jesus for us. As I mentioned, I think it was only last Sunday, it seems 100 years ago, Jesus, the human face of God, the one in whom we not only see God, but we also see our own destiny. That's the end of the journey. The beginning of the journey and the middle of the journey is more likely to feel like a time of testing, a time in the wilderness, and especially if we're worried for family and friends and frail neighbours. So offer those reflections as food for thought as we all continue in this in-between time, where the cyclone has kind of arrived but hasn't turned out to be as big as anticipated, but is not yet finished with us, and we're waiting to see what else may yet happen.